Welcome to the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Wow, what an intro to paperbackwarrior.com.
I like to mix it up.
Wow. So again, we're paperbackwarrior.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've got a ton of reviews on our website. Check those out. There's a right side menu with all the tags that you can browse. And Tom, what are we doing today?
Well, before we even get into the normal show content, you have solved a bit of a literary mystery you've been pursuing for about a year now. We talked about Manhunt Magazine. You've been doing some manhunting of your own. You found some action cover art model who was on a bunch of books that we have and like and review. Tell me the story real quick.
Dude, I'm really excited about this. So I did a feature article, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, trying to find this guy named Jason Savas. And do you remember Steve Holland?
Yeah, he was on like every cover. He was Mac Bolan, he's everything.
Right.
Half the books on my shelf, Steve Holland was the cover model.
Yes, he was deemed the face that launched 1,000 paperbacks. So he was an actor, and he was a model that dominated the men's action-adventure print from, I don't know, like the 1950s through probably the 1970s. His most notable print role was probably being the face of Doc Savage on all those Bantam paperbacks of the 60s and 70s. But if you start browsing 80s and 90s action-adventure novels, there's a face that you'll see repeatedly, and this guy is Jason Savas. And I had been looking for him for, like I said, for a couple of years, and it turns out that he was an avid listener of the podcast. And he found us online, and he sent me an email, and I was like, holy cow, is this the same guy? I was like, this is nuts.
Because you wrote a whole article, a feature article about him, basically saying that you were looking for him. It was like this nationwide thing where we were trying to find this guy and whatever became of him.
Right, exactly. And
Was he aware of that article?
I don't think he was. He never mentioned it to me. So I'm not sure, but he had listened to one of the episodes, and I can't remember what it was, but he was listening to something, and he found us, but... He emailed me, and the next thing I know, we're talking on the phone for a few hours, and I'm hounding the heck out of him. But Jason Savas was born in New York City. He started judo at an early age. Later, he began to excel at sports, and he dreamed of being a professional athlete. After graduating from City College in New York, he's walking around Central Park, and he ends up running into this wrestling competitor from high school. And the two, they have this quick exchange, and the guy tells Jason that he should look into modeling. He gives him a card, and really the rest is history. Jason goes on to be a professional model for 11 years with the Wilhelmina Modeling Agency, which, from my research, is a pretty darn good gig. Savas did thousands upon thousands of photo shoots. He did stuff with GQ, menswear. This dude did cigarettes, clothes, press kits, magazines, newspapers, you name it. Did a lot of stuff for Versace. But Tom, in 1981, something wild happened. He was asked to do photo shoots for book covers. He'd never done this before. He did over 1,000 book covers. He explained, he was really kind enough to explain the process to me. So essentially, Jason poses in the provided costume or the attire or the period piece, whatever it might be, right? He says for the action novels, he said typically there's going to be about 3 models posing. So in all those team-based combat books or whatever,
they bring all the dudes together.
Yes, they bring them together. Huh. And they're holding toy guns.
Oh, really? I guess that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. Photographer shoots the photos, and it goes to the illustrator to paint the cover based on the photograph. He says 99% of the time, the illustrator is at the photo shoot. So he's actually sort of a part of it. Jason did a half dozen Louis L'Amour covers, and he sent me a picture of one that he was in called The Iron Marshal. I don't know if you've ever seen that book cover, but it's pretty cool. He's got a big oil painting of that without the lettering or anything that was given to him by the artist. You can find this guy's face on stuff like there's probably you got tons of books over there. Probably has his face on it. Eagle Force, Avenger. This is the Chet Cunningham 90 series, not the pulp one. MIA Hunter, the Out of the Ashes series, Vietnam Ground Zero, and a bunch of standalone stuff like there's one called Black Moon. There's one called The Raid. He told me that he made a list of all the books that feature him on the cover art, and he's managed to find 250 physical books that has his face on it. He said he even has a book cover of himself in 9 different languages that was gifted to him.
Wow.
So it's not unusual, Tom, that most of his book covers were done for the romance genre.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, which is why it wouldn't have even registered on our radar screen, because we just keep seeing him in the 80s and 90s action stuff.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he's like Fabio to the romance people.
Yes, and he did a lot of stuff for Harlequin, which is probably the leading publisher of romance novels. In those shoots, though, dude, he gets to work with females.
Well, good point. And also, I wonder if there's synergy there because Harlequin also owned Gold Eagle.
Probably so. And I did ask him about that. He said that the publishers like Fawcett Gold Medal, Zebra, and Warner would pay the most money to have the best artists do their stuff, which makes sense. I mean,
that's consistent with what we see, right?
Yeah. But right now, Jason spends most of his time writing screenplays that he hopes to sell. And he also wrote his own action-adventure book a few years back called The Messenger. But I've got a full feature on Savas, including a lot of stuff that I didn't mention here. But that'll be out on the blog very soon. And I really want to thank Jason for his time and patience. Man, I asked him a ton of stuff, and he had to forgive some of my ignorance about modeling and photos and things like that. But I learned quite a bit during the discussion.
That's really interesting. I mean, imagine being able to interview Steve Holland about his time in the covers.
Right.
And so you really captured a bit of history there, and that's awesome that you were able to do that.
Yeah, and he said that he knew Holland, and he learned a lot from him as far as poses and the expressions that he should have in the action scenes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so. But anyway, what do we have on tap today?
Okay, so I'm going to be doing a feature on an author you should know more about named Richard Deming, and I'm also going to review a 1963 paperback by Deming called She'll Hate Me Tomorrow. What are you reviewing today?
I'm going to do Able Team Number 1, Tower of Terror.
Ooh.
And if there's time, we're going to discuss our favorite books that we read in February. Just to kind of go over those and recap what were the best things.
All right, so let's get into the feature. Richard Deming was an author of about 70 books and 100 or more short stories in our genre. So he's someone that we should all know about. He was born in Des Moines, Iowa in 1915, and he relocated to upstate New York as an adult. He died in 1983 in Ventura, California at age 68. He received a bachelor's degree from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. And like so many of the authors we enjoy, he was in the military during World War II, where he served as a captain in the U.S. Army. After the war, he worked for the American Red Cross for 5 years before quitting to pursue a full-time writing job as a freelance writer in 1950. He wrote short stories for the pulp magazines toward the very end of the pulp era in the very early 1950s. In fact, I just noticed today at work that I have a magnet up in my cubicle at work that's an image from an old pulp magazine called FBI Detective Stories magazine that features a story by Deming called Spy Maker's Masquerade, hyped on the cover. And I hadn't noticed that until today. Short story writing in the digest magazines was really his bread and butter throughout his career. I have an index of his short stories, and there are just hundreds of them through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, appearing in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, Mike Shane, and Manhunt. He sold short stories to publications that came and went really quickly, like Suspect Detective Stories and Verdict Detective Story, Bloodhound Detective Story. There are dozens of similar magazines that I'd never even heard of that he wrote for as well. This dude was very prolific. He even wrote a story for Don Pendleton's The Executioner magazine in August 1975 called The Coup. As near as I could tell, his last published short story was in 1980. I think his short stories are a great way to get acquainted with Richard Deming. The good news is that Wildside Press has done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. They've compiled 2 Richard Deming mega packs for 99 cents each. The first one has 15 short stories, and the second one has 23 short stories. They charge 99 cents a piece for these compilations on your Kindle. It's an amazing value. Many of these stories were adapted for television, including shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, M Squad, I don't know that show, Suspicion, Ford Television Theater, Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer. In fact, Mike Hammer's sort of interesting, the TV show, because they adapted a story he wrote for Black Mask magazine starring Deming's own private eye character, Manville Moon, into that, and basically just changed the character into Mike Hammer for TV. So there's 3 series characters you need to know when you're thinking about Deming. First one that I just mentioned, Manville Moon. Deming sold his first short story in 1947 to Popular Detective magazine. It starred, and we see this so many times in private eye fiction. I don't understand the allure. A one-legged private eye.
That's interesting.
So many private eyes out there have one eye, one leg, one arm.
Wow.
And that seems to be the gimmick. Anyway, Manny Moon was the one-legged private eye. He lost his leg in the war, and he's got this peg leg made from cork, steel, aluminum, and leather.
Wow.
There were a total of 19 Manny Moon stories and novellas appearing in the magazines, including Black Mask and Manhunt over the next decade. But there's 4 full Manville Moon novels you should know about. The Gallows in My Garden from 1952, Tweak the Devil's Nose from 53, Whistle Past the Graveyard from 54, and Juvenile Delinquent from 58. Thanks to Wildside Press and Prologue Press, many, if not all, of these Manny Moon stories and novels are available today as super cheap ebooks. I've heard great things about them, and I can't wait to dive into that series. I have not read them. His next series was starred a guy named Matt Rudd, who was a big city police vice cop in the fictional city of St. Cecilia. Different people have different theories on where St. Cecilia really is. I think it's based on Chicago. Other people put it in Southern California. It's kind of like when Ed McBain invented his own city for
right.
the 87th Precinct. Anyway, St. Cecilia is the Matt Rudd series. Matt Rudd's real name is Matus Radowski, and he's a Polish-American cop who shortened his name to Matt Rudd because no one could ever spell his actual name. Now, because he's a vice cop, the plots usually involve a decent dose of sex crime stuff. The series only went on for 3 novels. I read 2 of them, both of which I reviewed on Paperback Warrior. The first one's called Vice Cop. Second one is Anything But Saintly. Again, they were 1961 for Vice Cop, 63 for Anything But Saintly. 1964 was the final book in the Matt Rudd series called Death of a Pusher. I thought Vice Cop was just kind of okay. I thought Anything But Saintly was actually pretty excellent. Anything But Saintly, the book opens up with Matt Rudd playing gin with his partner in the police vice squad, and a guy barges in saying, "Is this where you come to report whores?" It was a great beginning. It totally grabbed you. The citizens, they complain it's this visitor from Houston who was rolled by a prostitute and wants to get us $500 back. And the simple crime that Matt Rudd is forced to investigate gets super complex when they learn the identity of the whore and the pimp. And it turns out that the pimp has pretty heavy political connections in St. Cecilia. It was just a great book. And that one's Anything But Saintly. You don't have to read Vice Cop first. It stands well on its own. And again, the good thing about Richard Deming, all still available. All 3 Matt Rudd books are available as ebooks and paperback reprints. So here's another interesting one. I got copies I want to hand over to you. Don't these look good?
Let's take a look.
What am I handing to you? Describe to the readers. I like it when you do this.
Ellery Queen, Why So Dead? Tim Corrigan, the man with the eye patch, enters a peril-packed girl-laden Arabian nightmare.
Right. So Tim Corrigan was an Ellery Queen series with 10 novels written under the Ellery Queen pseudonym. Originally, the bosses of Ellery Queen wanted another author named Talmadge Powell, who I've reviewed. They came to him with this idea about a Korean War veteran and Manhattan police captain with an eye patch. Again, it's very important that every one of these private eyes has something missing or not functioning in their body. So the first 6 books in the series were written by Talmadge Powell, and then Richard Deming wrote the final 4. Now, they look awesome. I really like the covers. I mean, he looks like a total badass. But I've heard from trusted sources that they're actually not that good. The 4 that Deming wrote were Why So Dead, 1966, How Goes the Murder, 1967, Which Way to Die, 1967, and What's in the Dark in 1968. I don't have a whole lot to say about that series, but it is interesting that he also wrote books as Ellery Queen, a pretty iconic name in mystery fiction. Now, where I'm going with this here, as far as Deming goes, is his standalone novels, in addition to his short stories, are pretty excellent. Several of which are reviewed at Paperback Warrior. I want to single out 3 for being particularly great. First one is Hit and Run from 1960. Again, we reviewed it at Paperback Warrior. It's just a masterpiece of a standalone novel about a guy who witnesses a hit-and-run accident involving a beautiful woman, and he concocts a scheme to blackmail her into engaging him as a private investigator to cover up the accident and keep her out of trouble. Amazing plot twist. It was originally a short story, probably from Manhunt, maybe from Alfred Hitchcock, that they expanded into a novel. Read the short story, read the novel, doesn't matter. Hit and Run is just awesome. Next one I want to hype for you is called Edge of the Law, also from 1960. He had this amazing 3-book series of standalone novels in 1960. Again, first one's Hit and Run. Next one's Edge of the Law, where this Miami hoodlum is on the run, and he settles down in a small town where he gets a job as muscle for the local crime lord. He gets sent to shake down a local business for protection money, and he finds out that the business is owned by his childhood sweetheart. So he needs to decide where his loyalties lie, whether he wants to go with his childhood sweetheart to fight against the mob that's shaking her down, or whether he wants to continue living as the mobster's muscle. Just a great standalone novel by an author at the top of his game. The third book from 1960 by Richard Deming I want to hype is called Kiss and Kill. In fact, I think we used a copy of that on a recent episode as for a coin flip. Here it is. There it is. Kiss and Kill. I got it right here. Richard Deming. She was almost sorry she had to die. The idea is that Sam and Mavis, a couple here, are con artists, and they run a scam where they pretend to be brother and sister. What Sam does is Sam seduces wealthy spinsters, marries them, and then makes off with their money.
That's a good.
It's a good premise, and he basically what he does is he says, "Hey, is it okay if my sister comes to live with us?" And he moves in Mavis, who's actually his real wife.
Okay,
right. Or his real woman. I can't remember if they're legally married. I don't care. But anyway, so it's this couple living under the roof of Sam and his new bride, who's just some wealthy spinster he's looking to rip off. Great book, lots of great twists and turns. Later in Richard Deming's career, he made a good living writing TV tie-in novels for shows including Dragnet, Mod Squad, Charlie's Angels, Vegas. That's the one. Vegas has the dollar sign for the S, and Starsky and Hutch. He wrote some books under pseudonyms. Nick Marino was a pseudonym. Emily Moore, Max Franklin. I think I've seen some of those. Halsey Clark, and Richard Hale Curtis, in addition to, obviously, Ellery Queen that we discussed. So many of Richard Deming's books remain in print today, and so our listeners who are interested in exploring this guy should take advantage of this opportunity to read him, because you don't have to go out and spend a fortune on some paperback that's going to fall apart in your hands. They're available today. So that's all I got, but I also feel the need to give credit where credit is due for the homework I did to create this feature. I want to credit Thrilling Detective website and the introduction to the Manville Moon novella No Pockets in a Shroud by Keith Allen Deutsch, Deutsch, for the biographical information about him. I also used a website called Queen's Bureau of Investigation, which appears on the internet as the best resource on everything Ellery Queen. The guy who does the rap sheet, J. Kingston Pierce, wrote an excellent, eloquent article about Richard Deming that I used also. So that's my feature on Richard Deming, and people should really check him out. He's an unsung hero of the genre and wrote some amazing, amazing books. I think his standalones are great. I've also heard incredible things about his Manny Moon books. So you got a review, right?
Yeah, I'm going to take us up to the 80s.
All right, good. So it's about time. Yeah, we've been doing a lot of crime noir type stuff lately, and our He-Man barrel-chested fans want to hear about some Gold Eagle stuff. All
right, cool. So I'm reviewing Able Team Number 1, Tower of Terror, published in 1982 by Gold Eagle. It was authored by a guy named L.R. Payne, which I don't know much about him. That same month, Gold Eagle also launched Phoenix Force. Both are spin-offs from the Mac Bolan universe. The marketing scheme is, it's kind of funny. They put Don Pendleton's name on the first 3 books of the series as a co-author. Of course, Pendleton didn't have any part of these books. It was just a marketing scheme to lure in the consumers that were familiar with Don Pendleton's name. They also came up with a house name for Able Team. It's a guy named Dick Stivers, and the series ended up running about 51 total installments. And it was just like the Mac Bolan books, where they just used a variety of authors to contribute to the series. So getting into Able Team here, in the Vietnam War, Sergeant Mac Bolan, which he became the executioner, of course, he ran a special forces unit called Team Able. And in the second executioner novel, Death Squad, Bolan calls up his old Team Able to help him fight the West Coast mob. Unfortunately, they were all killed in that battle, except for Bolan, a guy named Rosario Blancanales, who's nicknamed the Politician, and Herman Schwartz, who's nicknamed Gadgets. So after Bolan ends up becoming a government agent in Executioner number 39, The New War, the Bolin universe of characters really expanded. The series just grew and grew and grew. By 1982, Stony Farm director Hal Brugnola and Bolin direct 2 new teams to fight criminal cells. Phoenix Force would be dedicated to international fighting, while the Able team would concentrate on domestic terror. And it's no surprise that Rosario and Schwartz make up 2/3 of the Able team force, right? But the third guy is Carl Lyons, who was he was a former L.A. Police sergeant that helped Bolin in the early books fight against the mob. So these 3 guys make up Able team. So the first book has this Puerto Rican terrorist group take over a Wall Street skyscraper, and I don't know why, but they do it on a Saturday. And I guess the idea is to keep the building empty so they can plant bombs throughout the building. So they put bombs on various floors, and then they make a demand to the police that they want this and that. I can't remember what they were asking for, but it seemed kind of silly at the time. But inside the building, there's this Vietnam vet named Green, and he's like an executive, and he's got a crew there working for him on a Saturday, just doing busy work. So they end up going up into the higher floors to try to avoid the terrorist. I thought his part of the book was really entertaining. It was sort of like it was kind of like Die Hard.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the author only gives us about 2 pages of Green escaping the terrorist. Instead, we get Able team. So the police get the call from the terrorist. They call the FBI. The FBI phones Stony Farm, and Stony Farm calls Able team. So it kind of worked through the chain. But you know what the problem is, Tom?
Tell me.
Able team doesn't do anything. they do nothing. I was expecting them, based on the cover, I'm expecting them to hit the lobby in some kind of a massive firefight, and then sort of get spread out on the building and sort of do Die Hard. Instead, the trio just runs around all over the city, gaining clues on who the terrorists are and who's funding them.
Is it even like an origin story of the group, or is the group fully formed by the time when the book opens?
The Puerto Rican terrorist?
No, the Able team itself.
Yeah, they're already formed.
Okay,
yeah,
so we don't even, book 1 is it's not even relevant that it's book 1.
I think through the course of maybe the Stony Man books and maybe some of the Bolin books, they were working within Stony Farm anyway, so they decided, hey, we'll just take these 3 guys and put them together and make a team.
Wait, did Able team come after Stony Man Doctrine?
No, Stony Man Doctrine was I think 83 or 84, and this was 82.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not sure, but
I don't think Stony Man existed as a series until after Able team.
I probably misspoke. The Stony Man or Stony Farm, I should say.
Okay.
Yeah, Stony Farm.
Got it. All right.
So I think they were doing things.
They were side characters in
Yes.
Bolin Executioner books that they formed together as the team.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you had.
I know Carl is in like book 1 and 2 of the Executioner. He's there from day 1.
Yeah, but you got to think that's almost 2 decades of Bolin books. So these guys have shown up periodically.
All right, that makes sense.
Yeah, but instead of just going to the building and confronting these terrorists who are going to blow up the building at any moment,
right?
They spend their whole time just running around the city. Gadget's he just does radio stuff. I mean, he's just playing with the radio, doing this and that for pages and pages and pages. Lyons runs around looking for clues on the whereabouts of the terrorist cell, like how they formed, who's behind it, that kind of thing. And Rosario, he just rides around in a freaking cab the whole novel. He's just riding around in a cab because he's trying to follow Gadgets and Lyons on wherever they're going. It was bizarre. So the big firefight that's supposed to happen is just basically at the end, the terrorists are standing on this rooftop, and the guys in the helicopter just shoot them. That's it. There's nothing else. Tom, this book blows.
It's no good.
I thought it sucked. And I'm sure there are better authors than L.R. Payne that's treating this series a lot better. And I'm not well versed on these installments, so anyone out there that wants to send me a best of list, I'll certainly entertain it. I think we had maybe an email a few months back that I probably need to dig up, but I think it had like maybe the top 5 Able Team books. Anyway, I hated Able Team number 1. And again, this is Tower of Terror by L.R. Payne. And I hate it, and you can take it to the bank. It's horrible.
All right, I got a good one, though, just to recommend it. Our Able Team number 8, Army of Devils.
Okay, I've heard that's good.
It's really good. Like, just read nothing but the first page, and you'll get hooked in.
Right.
It's a bloodbath.
Who wrote that?
Yeah, I know you're putting me on the spot. The information's out. Wait, I can tell you. Give me 2 seconds. Vamp for a second. The book is not a guy that I knew. This one was actually written by G.H. Frost. He wrote about a dozen Able Team books, and which are Glorious Trash Guy says that they're all just as insane as this one. This one takes place at like a college campus that gets taken over by terrorists, and they're like hacking people's arms off on page 1.
Oh wow!
So that might be the guy to go with.
So I think like Able Team 2 or 3 or something has like a crime noir author that did it. I want to say like it's not Gil Brewer, but somebody like.
Did Dan Marlowe write it?
No, he did one of those Phoenix Force books.
Okay, he did a Phoenix Force.
Yeah.
We can figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Anyway, that's Able Team, number 1. Doesn't sound like it's a good one. And we wonder who the author was and why we haven't heard much of that author. It sounds like there's probably a good reason for that, huh?
Yes, agreed.
Okay, I'm going to launch into my review, which is She'll Hate Me Tomorrow by Richard Deming. It was a mid-career crime novel for Deming, published by Monarch Books in 1963. It's available today as an ebook. It stars a woman by the name of Stella Parsons. She's this 23-year-old, real good-looking lady right out of secretarial school, and she lands a job as a secretary for an attorney representing a Chicago crime boss. So the mobster decides that the attorney, among others, just knows way too much about his operations and kills the lawyer. And it becomes clear that Stella is also in danger because she did the sin of having taken dictation from her boss detailing his client's misdeeds. There's an attorney who wants to kill this woman solely because she was a secretary for the mobster's attorney and she knows too much. So mob assassins are on her tail. She takes off to this fictionalized Midwest city of St. Stephen's where she lands a job as a coat check girl at a gambling joint, an after-hours joint, run by somebody named Clancy Ross. One of my favorite lead characters in any novel is this guy, Clancy Ross. He's the gambler. He likes to operate his gambling establishment free from influence of the local mafia thanks to this uneasy peace treaty he's got with the local boss. Anyway, so the Chicago mob eventually figures out where she is. This is pretty early in the book, and sends a hitman to the city in search of Stella. And so Clancy, the real hero of this book, Clancy Ross, needs to decide whether to protect his coat check girl or whether to serve her up. Again, he's this white knight hero for both Stella and the reader. He's funny, he's self-deprecating, he's super competent, and he's capable of extreme violence. I want to spend more time with this Clancy Ross character than this 143-page paperback allowed me to. Watching him solve problems with this direct and confrontational approach was such a pleasure, and I wish Deming would have figured out a way to make that guy into a series character for more adventures. By the time the 1960s rolled around, Deming's writing had improved a lot. He also seemed to have more latitude from Monarch Books to have graphic sex scenes, which, of course, I always appreciate. The title, She'll Hate Me Tomorrow, is a terrible title, and I have no idea what it means in the context of the story, and the paperback cover was just kind of okay. But this was a top-tier crime fiction paperback. It's absolutely worth reading. It's also one of Deming's finest work, so I can't recommend it highly enough. The book, again, is She'll Hate Me Tomorrow by Richard Deming. Please, 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 for the love of all things holy, check it out.
Awesome. So before we scram, we've got just a couple more minutes. I want to go over our favorite books that we read for February, maybe just one or two. So if you're listening to this today, which is Monday, the 24th of February, on Wednesday of this week, I've got my review for Sharpshooter number 1, The Killing Machine by Peter McCurtain. It's probably one of my favorite books that I read this month, and I'm not going to give away too much since you're going to be reading the review later this week, but it's a 1973 vigilante novel published by Belmont. And it's essentially this executioner clone.
It was written under a pseudonym, right? You said it was written by McCurtain, but we don't. But
yeah, it's Bruno Rossi.
Oh yeah, okay,
yeah,
got it.
But it's an executioner clone. The series order is so screwed up. So I'm just concentrating on whatever the actual story is in these books, despite the numbering sequence on the cover. And you can go out there and read a whole essays on how they screwed up the order of these books. But Johnny Rock's the main character, and he's fighting the mob to avenge the murder of his family. It's a fun, violent book, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it as much as I did. It was really good.
And the only book I liked in February, especially that I haven't previously discussed on the podcast, is the 10th book in the Richard Stark's Parker series. It's called The Green Eagle Score. It was written by Donald Westlake, of course, under his Richard Stark name in 1967, and it finds Parker and his team planning a payroll heist at an Air Force base. It's not the best Parker novel, but it's still better than 99% of the stuff we cover on Paperback Warrior. Yeah, it was great. And so you can check out my review. The review posted on the Paperback Warrior blog on February 18. Shouldn't be hard to find. And I think that was. And other than that, every other book that I loved in February, I've kind of already beaten to death on the podcast.
Right.
So
yeah, we covered a lot this month.
It's been a good month.
Yeah.
Everybody
awesome.
got their money's worth for the free podcast we give them every week.
That's right. Well, that's all I have.
That's all I got.
All right. Hope you arrive safely at work.
All right, yeah, drive gently, people. Keep your hands at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and keep on reading.